Once upon a time, TV shows were inferior to movies at the theater. We'd watch TV shows during the week, then go see the real, hard-hitting stories and visuals at the theater on the weekend. Obviously, the landscape of TV has changed entirely over the past decade or so. Now it seems that a lot of shows and movies are on the same level, or there's just no need to go and see movies in theaters anymore because they come out on streaming services on the same day. While I've got some mixed thoughts on that particular practice, this entire change in the world of television can really be traced back to one show, and that's Lost. Lost is a show I have a lot of fond memories of. I started watching it with my mom at the start of season 4, so I thought that it was just a cool sci-fi mystery show with these crazy elements, but it turns out that's not what Lost was, or at least it wasn't what people liked about Lost. The first 3 seasons are what people think of when they think of Lost, or at least the good part of Lost, and all of this started somewhere. So let's talk about the brilliant, captivating, and mysterious pilot of Lost. So I wanted to kind of go into this acting like I had never seen it before, and the episode really starts off with a bang. We have no clue what's going on, who this guy is, but then, dog? The opening scene is absolutely flawless. Following Jack through the wreckage is horrifying and honestly super realistic seeming. I don't know, I've never been in a plane crash before. Probably because this episode was the most expensive episode in the history of television at the time. This was unlike anything we had ever seen before, and the producer who greenlit this episode was actually fired because it just wasn't something that television did. He was later rehired after his gamble paid off. But this is how you open an episode. There's obviously a tragedy that's just occurred. We don't know who these people are or what happened, only that there's a guy trying to help injured people, and that's all we really need to know. The visuals and the events happening on screen are enough to keep us captivated until it slows down and we're ready to actually meet our characters. But by that point, we're already heavily invested in what's going on. The introduction to all the characters does so much with very little. For 2004, we really have such an incredibly diverse cast to the point that if this show came out today, people would call it woke. We get a good glimpse at who everybody is without needing too much dialogue or exposition, but the dialogue we do get is incredible.
And the nerves just spilled out of her like angel hair pasta.
Jack and Kate have gone through something that most strangers never go through. In fact, I don't think any strangers have ever gone through this before. And he laughs and says that he doesn't even know her name. Conversations like this make all these situations feel entirely grounded, even though some of the stuff happening is not so grounded. We get to see that this island is not exactly just a deserted island, and there's something in the woods on the island with them. The first flashback on the plane answers some questions, like the liquor bottles in Jack's pocket, what actually happened during the initial time that the plane was crashing, but also poses some more questions, like why this guy ran past Jack and why the flight attendants were chasing after him. This is something that this pilot and this entire show does so well. We get some answers in the flashbacks that set up more questions, then we see those answers, but they set up some more questions, so on and so forth. This does the show some great benefits, but eventually some pretty great disservices too. Jack, Kate, and Charlie go to find the cockpit of the plane and end up finding the pilot, which is why the episode's title is Pilot.
Actually, Thrifty, first episodes are called pilots because it's when they first air.
Yes, I know all of that, but I still think this episode could have been called Pilot because of what happens to the pilot. The monster has a pretty key role in the pilot episode, but we never actually see it, and that's a key factor. Whatever it is, it must be pretty massive, knocking over trees and making all sorts of different noises. Some of them sound mechanical. It really covers all bases and allows you to let your imagination run wild. For a lot of reasons, I think it's smart not to show the monster right away. Your imagination is scarier than anything any show or movie could ever put on screen, but I also think there's another reason for not showing the monster. Some of it is probably due to the budget. It was already far above the budget of any pilot episode ever, but I also think that the writers didn't really know what the monster was just yet. With the way it sounds, some people thought it was some sort of rampant machine, like one of the Dwemmers from Skyrim or something. Other people thought it was some kind of dinosaur or Godzilla type of creature, but in reality, it was very different. We may never know, but I imagine during these initial episodes, the monster wasn't supposed to just be a smoke monster. At the start of Pilot Part 2, we get to see the answer to a previous mystery and also learn more about Charlie and his habits. We also spend more time with characters that we really just got a glimpse at beforehand, like Jin and Sun, Claire, Saeed, Michael, and Locke. We also meet Sawyer, who wasn't actually in the first episode, something I didn't notice until this time around, or something I just wasn't paying attention to because he actually is in the first episode. This episode starts to dive into the fact that this is truly an ensemble show. While there's definitely favorites, Jack is the protagonist, and there's Kate and Sawyer and Locke, each character eventually gets their time to shine, develop and change into memorable characters, and make this show worth watching. There's also a big subplot in this episode about the handcuffs and who the prisoner on the plane was. The most obvious answer is Sawyer. He's unlikable, untrustworthy, an asshole, typical prisoner behavior. But we learn that it's actually Kate, who up until this point we saw as trustworthy. This is really the first dramatic plotline introduced in the show because the air marshal wakes up and asks Jack about Kate, and that's one of the cliffhangers of the episode because we don't know how Jack is going to react. There's a scene where Hurley and Saeed are talking about how Saeed can work the transceiver. He says he fought in the Gulf War, and Hurley asks what branch, but he learns that Saeed wasn't actually on the side of the United States. It's aspects to stories like these that I love so much. When, regardless of anybody's background, the situation you're currently in is far more important than any prior history. It's why I gravitate towards fantasy and apocalypse stories. I like seeing people working together while also having their own histories and agendas. It makes everything you see far more interesting, in my opinion. Seeing all these people cling to the hope of rescue, to be saved, to help the injured, just to have that slowly taken away from them as the episodes progress, really makes you feel the isolated nature of the island and the stakes of the mission to try and get the transceiver working while there's still a working battery, even though there's some sort of monster lurking in the jungle. When things go south and the monster makes an appearance, we find out that it's a polar bear. Wait, that can't be right. It's not big enough to be the monster from beforehand, but this is also a polar bear on a deserted island? Why is it here? How is it here? It's these sort of questions that gave Lost the longevity it had. People wanted answers to this question, to all the questions, and while we did end up getting some answers, we didn't get all of them. And here's a hot take, but maybe we don't need all the answers. If you give the audience all the answers, it might not be the answers they wanted, and a lot of the time the answers you come up with in your own imagination are better than the answers any writer can give you. It also allows a story like Lost to live on longer than it would have. When people talk about Inception, 9 out of 10 times the first thing they bring up is the ending. Is it all a dream or was it real? People have split opinions on that topic, and I believe the same is true about Lost. One thing I gotta bring up real quick that remains constant throughout both of these episodes and of course the series is the incredible score by Michael Giacchino. Lost has such an incredibly unique and powerful score. It brings you into this world and is almost instantly recognizable whenever I hear it. Cannot give it enough praise. Well done. When the group finally gets a signal, Shannon actually makes herself useful and translates the French message, a woman asking for help and how it killed everybody she was with. Saeed does the math and says that the message has been running for 16 years. Charlie says his line,
Where are we?
and the episode ends. One thing this episode, or episodes, since this is a two-parter, but I'm just going to keep counting it as one episode, does particularly well is staying on the island. As the show goes on, each character gets a flashback to the time leading up to the plane crash, highlighting their particular story and development, but this episode we get 3 different flashbacks. One for Jack, Charlie, and finally Kate with the big prisoner revelation. Other than this, we're focused on developing the characters on the island, because like I said, their pasts don't really matter, at least not yet. This first episode is all about setting up the mysteries of the island, and the story of trying to get off of it. it. We get a setup for character drama with Kate and Jack, but the highlights of this episode are all the mysteries that they set up. The monster in the jungle, the French woman on the phone, the polar bear, and by the end of the episode we realize it's not gonna be easy for them to get off this island. We're then left with how we feel about the characters and the drama that's been set up, and how much we want to see answers to the monster. Which is funny that this pilot spends so much time around the monster, because we don't actually get a glimpse at it for another 23 episodes. While it's seen from the character's perspective much earlier on, after this episode, the monster actually takes a back seat in favor of other, even more mind-bending mysteries. While some people, myself included, think that as the series went on, they kind of started winging it, there is some evidence from even this episode to suggest otherwise. When Locke talks with Walt playing backgammon, he talks about two sides, light and dark, which ends up being one of the primary storylines in the later seasons. This episode very much holds up to this day. A lot of that is due to how they went all out with the show's budget. This episode still has a higher budget, or at least a comparable budget to many shows today, and a lot of people don't realize this, but the whole reason why we even have shows like Game of Thrones or Stranger Things or anything you can really name is because of Lost. Yes, there were serialized dramas like The Sopranos on TV, but that was on HBO, an additional paid service. You expected the shows to be more movie quality, but for basic cable and network television, a show like Lost had never been done before. It was appointment television. You couldn't pick up any episode and start right there. You'd be, well, lost. You needed to watch every episode beforehand to understand the full scope of the story. It wasn't like CSI or Criminal Minds, where 95% of the episodes you don't need to know what happened beforehand to understand the story of the week. Lost was a different animal. I believe there's a straight line between what Lost did for television and the shows that we have today. This was not only a groundbreaking episode of television for the time, it's still a pilot episode that does everything correctly. Sets up the characters and how their relationships with each other are going to progress, introduces the stakes, the mysteries you want to see answers to, and keeps you captivated throughout the entire runtime. If for some reason you've never seen this show, I envy you. I absolutely 100% urge you to give this show a shot. Whatever negatives you might have heard about it, it's entirely possible that you feel differently, might have a different interpretation, or will just end up liking what others didn't. While I say it's good to leave things to the imagination, with cases like Lost, the experience is so much more rewarding. And those are my thoughts on the pilot episode of Lost. What are your thoughts on this episode and the series in general? Let me know if you want to see more videos on Lost. I've never done this before, but let's say if this video gets 3,000 likes, then I'll make another video on what I believe to be the best episode of the series, The Constant. Special thanks to my channel members, you guys are the greatest. If you haven't already, you should consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.